The water stood like a wall. That is what they remember, the wall of water, the corridor of dry ground, the impossible geometry of an ocean folded back on itself. They talk about it the way people talk about miracles, with wide eyes and borrowed words, always borrowing from someone else who was there, someone who said they saw it, someone whose grandfather swore on his grave. But I was there, not watching, not standing at a distance with the crowd, not pressed shoulder to shoulder in the sand, squinting at the horizon, waiting to see what God would do next. I was lifted toward it. I felt the moment before the sea moved, and I am telling you, the moment before is the part nobody talks about. The moment before was silence so complete it had weight, wind moving in one direction then stopping the way breathing stops when a person is waiting to learn if the news is good or bad. The whole world paused, the horses behind us screaming, the children somewhere in the crowd not even crying anymore, they had run out of tears. The sea ahead, black and enormous in the early dark, refusing to be anything other than what it was. And Moses holding me tighter than he had held anything in his life. I knew even then that I was about to become part of a story I didn't fully understand. But let me start before that. Let me start at the very beginning, when I was nothing more than a branch. I grew on a hillside in Midian for years before any human hand touched me. I know that sounds strange, a staff speaking of its origins as wood, but I remember it. The way light moved through my leaves in seasons I cannot count. The way goats passed beneath me and never looked up. The way wind bent me sideways in storms and I always came back. The hillside was quiet, dry rock, thin soil, the smell of sun-baked earth and the occasional sweetness of something blooming far below in the valley. I was cut down by a man named Jethro, if I remember the voices correctly, trimmed, shaped, the bark stripped away in long curling ribbons that fell into the dust. I felt the loss of every ring of wood removed, the way you might feel the loss of something familiar, not painful exactly, but noticeable, a narrowing. For a time I leaned against the wall of a tent and collected dust. Then the old man gave me to his son-in-law. I do not know everything about Moses before that day. I only know what I heard from the hands that held me, from the conversations I was nearby for, from the weight a person carries that communicates itself to everything they touch. I know he was a man in the middle of a long silence. Something had happened to him before Midian, something enormous that he had walked away from. I could feel it the way you can feel weather before it arrives. A heaviness in him, a history he carried but did not speak. He held me like a man who was grateful to have something solid in his hands. For years, that is what I was, solid, useful. I helped him up the steep parts of hills when the rock was loose and his footing was uncertain. I kept the sheep moving. I steadied him in wind. I became a habit. The way a person reaches for a familiar object without thinking, the hand knowing where to go before the mind does. I thought that was my life. I was not unhappy about it. The day everything changed smelled like dry grass and old smoke and something else underneath, something I had never encountered before, something that doesn't have a name. We were further out from the usual pasture. I remember that because the air was different, thinner, hotter in a way that wasn't about the sun. Moses stopped. He had stopped before on these walks, to drink, to rest, to look out over the valley and think whatever thoughts he kept to himself. But this stop was different. His hand tightened on me slowly, the way a hand tightens when the body registers something the mind hasn't caught up with yet. There was a bush burning on the hillside. I didn't understand why we kept watching it. Fire in dry country is not unusual, but this fire was not consuming anything. The branches didn't blacken. The leaves held their shape. The flame moved through the plant like water moves, touching everything, destroying nothing. Moses whispered something I couldn't fully hear. Then he took a step toward it. I want to be honest about what happened next because I think about it often. A voice came out of that fire and it didn't sound like a voice. It sounded like something that had always been speaking, and we were only now close enough to hear it. I felt it move through the wood of me, the way vibration moves through a living tree in a storm, not from outside, but from everywhere at once. Moses took off his sandals. He put his face down. The ground felt different under me when his hand lowered me to it. I cannot explain that. The ground was the same rock and dust it had always been, but something had changed in the relationship between that ground and everything standing on it, like the hillside had suddenly become aware of itself. The voice spoke for a long time. Moses argued. I had never heard him argue before. He was not a man of many words on our long walks, but he argued here, and not timidly. He said he was the wrong person. He said no one would believe him. He said he couldn't speak well enough. I understood something then that I hadn't understood before. Being chosen is not the same as feeling ready. At some point in the conversation, the voice asked what was in his hand. Moses looked at me. He said, "A staff." And then everything I thought I was changed. The things I was asked to do in Egypt, I will not pretend I understood them as they were happening. I was pointed at water, and the water changed color, dark and thick and wrong. The smell alone made people cover their faces. I felt Moses' hesitation every time, the breath he took before he raised me, the slight trembling that was not weakness but something closer to awe. He never grew casual about it, not once. Every miracle carried the same weight as the first one. I respected that about him. The frogs came, then the insects, then the darkness. I want to tell you something about Pharaoh that the stories don't quite capture. I was there in that throne room more than once, close enough to the man to observe him. He was not simply cruel in the way people imagine tyrants, distant and cold and unfeeling. He was afraid, deeply afraid in the way that powerful people are afraid, which is a specific kind of fear. The terror of being wrong in public, of the world discovering that your authority was always borrowed, never owned. Every time he said no, I felt Moses' heart sink a little. And every time it sank, he raised me anyway. That is the thing about Moses that I carry with me. He was not fearless. He was not certain. He doubted constantly. I could feel the doubt in the grip of his hand, the way a person holds tighter to things they're unsure of. But he went forward. That is not the same as courage the way people talk about courage, the clean, bright, triumphant kind. This was something dirtier and more real. Obedience that cost him something every single day. The night of the final plague was the quietest night I can remember. Something moved through Egypt that night that I have no language for. Whatever it was, it did not touch me, but I felt its passing like a change in air pressure, a great, terrible weight moving through the world and then lifting. Before dawn, the sound from the palace was not what anyone expected. Not rage, not defiance. It was grief. Raw animal grief, the kind that doesn't care who hears it. By morning, Pharaoh told them to leave. And the people of Israel, hundreds of thousands of them, more than I could count or comprehend, a river of people rather than a nation, began to move. The journey to the sea took days. I know people imagine the Exodus as a triumphant march, heads high, hearts soaring, God's people walking out of bondage into freedom with music playing and the light falling just right on their faces. It wasn't like that. It was chaos and exhaustion and children crying and old people moving too slowly and animals frightened by the crowd and the smell of too many people in too little space and dust. So much dust that the air tasted of it for miles. People argued. People panicked. People asked Moses where exactly they were going and when they would stop and whether there was water ahead and whether the food would last. Moses never answered any of it the way they wanted him to. He kept walking. I kept walking with him, hitting the ground with the regularity of a heartbeat. I had become that, a rhythm he needed, something that marked the pace, something solid in his hand while everything around him was uncertain. And then the sea appeared. I had never seen the sea before. None of us had. Most of these people had been born and died within the borders of Egypt, and Egypt's sea was something distant and theoretical, a word in other people's sentences. But here it was, real, enormous, the color of bruised sky. The smell of it hit before the sound did, that thick salt smell, alive and old at the same time. People stopped walking. Then the sound came from behind. The ground vibrated first. Then the horizon behind us darkened, not with weather, but with movement. Organized, fast, mechanical movement. The flash of metal in morning light. The thunder of hooves that started far away and got louder faster than anything natural should get louder. Pharaoh had changed his mind. Of course he had. The panic in that crowd was unlike anything I had felt before, and I had been through the plagues. This was different because this was comprehensible. Frogs and darkness were supernatural horrors. This was just soldiers. This was just death coming on horses, and people understood death on horses in their bones. This fear had a shape. I heard someone scream, "Were there no graves in Egypt? Did you bring us out here to die in the desert?" I felt Moses' hand shaking. Just for a moment, just for the length of one breath. The shaking of a man who is carrying something too heavy, who has been carrying it for too long, who for one unguarded second lets the weight show. Then he raised his voice. He said, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." The words came out steady. I don't know how. I felt the unsteadiness in the hand that held me, but the words came out steady. Then he was quiet again. And the voice came, not from the bush this time, not from any visible place, just from everywhere and nowhere the way it always came. And it said something that Moses translated into action without speaking it aloud to anyone. He lifted me toward the sea. Let me tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think this is the part I most need to describe. My whole existence had been building towards something I didn't know was coming. Every hillside in Midian, every year in the tent, every slow walk behind the sheep, every moment in Egypt, every raised miracle. All of it was a sentence building to this word. When Moses extended me over that water, I did not feel powerful. I want to be clear about this because I think people assume that the instrument of a miracle feels the miracle the way the audience does, with awe, with wonder, with the clean exhilaration of watching the impossible happen. It wasn't like that. What I felt was more like completion. The way a key feels, not strong, not remarkable on its own, just the right shape to turn the right lock. Moses held me out over the water. His arm trembled. The wind began. Not a gentle wind, not a suggestion of a breeze. Something massive, something that had been held back somewhere and was now released all at once. It hit the surface of the sea with a sound like a hand striking a drum, a single percussive thud, and then the roar of sustained pressure. People behind us staggered. Children screamed. The livestock panicked and pulled at whatever held them. But Moses didn't move. He stood in that wind like a post driven into the ground, his robe snapping and twisting, his eyes open, looking at the water, his hand steady on me now, steadier than it had been before he began, steadier than it had been in days, as if the act of obedience had resolved the trembling. The water started to divide. I have tried to find language for this, and I don't think language can do it. Imagine water, ancient, deep, indifferent water that has been sitting in the same place since the world was young, suddenly deciding to be somewhere else. Not being pushed, not being forced, deciding. That is how it looked to me. A decision made by the water, cooperating with something it had always been waiting to cooperate with. The walls rose. On each side of the corridor that opened, the sea piled itself upward, not frozen, not still, but moving, roiling, churning within itself, held in place by something invisible. The walls of water moved. They just didn't fall. The ground beneath was wet, then damp, then dry. Not gradually, quickly. As if the sea floor itself was participating, wanting to be ready. Moses stepped forward. And then the whole of Israel began to move. That crossing took most of the night. I have no idea how long exactly. I have always been poor with time, even when time still meant something to me. But it was long. It was hundreds of thousands of people, and they moved in the specific way frightened people move when fear and relief arrive at the same time. Too fast and too slow simultaneously, some running, some paralyzed. Some carrying children who had fallen asleep against their shoulders, in the way children sleep, even in the middle of disasters. Moses and I walked with them. He walked the corridor between the walls of water. I want you to picture this correctly. The walls were not far away. They were close enough that the spray reached us, close enough that the sound of water pressing against itself was constant and enormous, a roar that never stopped, a sound like something straining against tremendous force. I heard fish. This is the detail I remember and no one ever talks about. In those walls of water, in the darkness and the torchlight that the people carried, you could see movement. The sea had not stopped being a sea, it had just moved. And the creatures in it moved with it. Shadows in the walls. The shapes of things that had no name, deeper things, older things, moving along the surface of the impossible the way they moved along the bottom of the ocean on any other night. I wondered what they made of us. A few times during the crossing, Moses stopped and turned to look back, not because he doubted. I could feel the difference by then between his doubt and his watchfulness. This was watchfulness. He was counting, assessing, making sure everyone was through, the way a shepherd moves last, checking for strays, refusing to cross until the whole flock is safe. The last group through were the elderly, the ones who moved slowest, some of them being carried by younger men, others refusing to be carried, moving on their own legs at whatever pace those legs allowed. Their faces were things I cannot describe properly. Something between exhaustion and a feeling I have no word for, the face of someone who has waited so long for something that they stopped believing it would come, and now it has come, and they are not sure yet if they are dreaming. One old man, near the end of the crossing, stopped walking. Right there in the middle of the sea floor, between the walls of water, he stopped. People tried to move him. He wouldn't be moved. He reached out and put his hand on the wall of water beside him, just touched it. A flat palm pressed against water that should not have been standing there, against the surface of an impossibility. He stood like that for a long time. Then someone put an arm around him and walked him the rest of the way. I have thought about him many times since. I wish I knew his name. I wish I knew what he was thinking in that moment. Whatever it was between him and the miracle, and some things deserve to stay private. The Egyptians came in after us. I don't know what Pharaoh's commanders were thinking. Maybe they thought the corridor would hold for them. Maybe they were beyond thinking and only pursuing, the way soldiers sometimes become a single purpose rather than a collection of men. We were on the other side by then. Moses looked at me. I understood. He turned back toward the sea, extended me again. The same motion, the same stillness in his body, the same sense of a key being turned in a lock. The walls fell. I won't describe what followed in detail. It is not mine to describe with any satisfaction or triumph. Those were men who died. Whatever they had done, whatever had brought them to that shore, they were men. The sound that came when the sea returned to itself was physical. It moved through the sand beneath us. It moved through the air. It moved through every person standing on that bank. Some people cheered. I understood the cheering. I did. It was the sound of people who had expected to die and had not died. It was the sound of relief given a voice. I understood it. But Moses was quiet. He stood at the edge of the water for a long time after it had closed, just looking at the sea, which was already becoming a sea again, already smoothing over, already returning to its indifferent rolling, already keeping its secrets. I wanted to understand what he was feeling. I wasn't sure I was capable of it. There is a song that came next. Miriam, Moses' sister, led it. Tambourines. The women dancing. The words rose up out of that crowd in layers, not organized, not rehearsed, but erupting the way music erupts when people can't hold something inside anymore. The horse and rider he has hurled into the sea. I have heard many songs in my long existence after those days. None of them had that quality, the quality of something being sung for the first time, words finding the shape of an experience still raw, still wet with recent living. Moses sang too, softly, in a voice that was not a singing voice, a man not entirely comfortable with the act but compelled to it anyway. I felt his hand relax for the first time in days. He was not a man who relaxed easily or for long. But in that moment, on the shore of the sea that had done what seas should not do, holding me loosely at his side, listening to his people sing, he was, for a little while, simply glad. I was glad with him. I stayed with Moses for the rest of his life. I was there at Marah when the water was bitter and he put the wood in it and it became sweet. I was there at Horeb when he struck the rock and water poured from stone. I was there at the hill during the battle with Amalek, when his arms grew tired from holding me raised and Aaron and Hur came and held his arms up for him, one on each side, like two men propping up the sky. That image, Moses' arms held up by his brothers while I was lifted toward the heavens, is one I carry. I was there on Sinai, waiting while Moses climbed. Those 40 days the mountain smoked and the people in the valley did what frightened people do when they are left alone too long. I was there through all of it. And when Moses died on Mount Nebo, at the edge of the land he was not permitted to enter, I was not with him. He went up that mountain without me. I think he went alone the way a person goes somewhere they have to go alone, not because no one offered to come, but because some final arrivals belong to you. Someone found me after. I don't know who. I was carried for a while by different hands, and none of them were his, and I missed him in whatever way a piece of wood can miss something. I have been many things since. Stored, forgotten, found again, studied by men who looked at me as a relic rather than a witness. I have spent long years in darkness and silence. I have lost track of time in the way that old things lose track of time, not sadly, just inevitably, the way you stop counting your breaths. But I remember the Red Sea. I remember it not as a miracle, not as something extraordinary and finished and sealed behind glass. I remember it as a night, a real night, with spray and darkness and the smell of the sea and frightened people, and one man with shaking hands who chose to obey anyway. I have been asked, not literally, but in the way that objects are asked by the people who hold them and wonder, whether I knew, when I was just a branch on a hillside in Midian, what I was becoming. I didn't. I was just growing, the way things grow when no one is watching. I was just waiting, the way things wait when they don't know yet what they're waiting for. But something new. Something let the right man find the right shepherd in the right desert. Let him be given a plain stick by an ordinary father-in-law. Let that stick end up in the hand that would be asked to raise it toward an ocean. Nothing about it was an accident. Even the silence on that hillside, even the years behind the sheep, even the dust and the nothing and the long, slow, ordinary days, they were preparation, even when they felt like emptiness. The sea moved because it was supposed to move. The miracle was real because obedience was real. And if a simple piece of wood from a dry hillside in Midian could become the thing an ocean listened to, then I have to believe that nothing ordinary is only ordinary. Some things are just waiting to learn what they are for.